Got late. This is Chapter 11, Coming to Terms. Boulder investigators were anxious to have another opportunity at interviewing the parents after they had suddenly ceased communication on Saturday, December 28, 1996. There were many unanswered questions that they wanted to ask, and they wanted to further clarify information that had been gathered on the day of the kidnapping. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis and Child Abduction and Serial Killer Units and premier federal law enforcement investigative agencies that dealt with those types of cases were in direct consultation with the Boulder Police and offering advice on how to arrange and conduct those follow-up interviews. It was apparent from the standpoint of the Ramsey attorneys that they didn't want their clients walking through the doors of the police department and being subjected to interrogation-style interviews. They wanted to control the environment and the setting, and continuously rejected investigators' requests that the Ramseys come to the station like every other victim, witness, or suspect. Patsy Ramsey continued to be emotionally fragile, and her attorney at one point had suggested that she be interviewed for no longer than an hour at a time and she be in the company of her physician. The proffer was made that detectives would be allowed to see her at one of the Ramsey's attorney's office, but no visit to the police department building would be permitted. These terms were unacceptable to the investigators. They were perplexed by the Ramseys' early decision to obtain legal counsel and felt that they were attempting to hide something. They wanted to speak to Patsy Ramsey in particular due to the similarities of her handwriting to the ransom note. This and the fact that the note had been written on a pad of paper belonging to her put Patsy in the bucket of suspects, as Steve Thomas would later describe it. The negotiations went on for weeks and were frequently played out in the press. Just when it seemed that everyone had agreed to a set of conditions, something would change, and the Ramsey PR team usually blamed authorities for being inflexible and insensitive to the victims of the crime. Eventually, a date and time would be set, April 30th, 1997. Investigators would be permitted the opportunity to separately interview John and Patsy Ramsey, and they would use the time in any manner they saw fit. Each would be represented by his or her attorney, of course, and a member of the DA's office would also sit in as an observer. Investigators were predominantly interested in Patsy Ramsey. In addition to her handwriting style being consistent with the ransom note, photographs that had been developed from the White's Christmas Day dinner party had been reviewed, and it was discovered that Patsy had been wearing the same clothing, a red turtleneck sweater and black pants, on the morning of the reported kidnapping as those depicted in the holiday photos. Rick French had noted his observations about this attire in his initial police report, and he also observed that her hair and makeup had been done on the morning of the kidnapping. The clothing seemed out of character for the former Miss America beauty contestant, and family friends had told the investigators that Patsy had never been observed to wear the same outfit 2 days in a row. She was always meticulous about her appearance. Investigators were pondering if she had ever gone to bed that night and were anxious to hear a full accounting of her storyline. Detectives Tom Trujillo and Steve Thomas were assigned the task of interviewing Patsy and John Ramsey, and it had been agreed that the interviews would take place in a conference room at the district attorney's office. Trujillo began the questioning by asking Patsy for some general background information and learned that she had grown up in Parkersburg, West Virginia. She pointed to some of the highlights junior high, mentioning that she had been a cheerleader in 10th grade and had moved up and up on the drill team her senior year. She attended the University of West Virginia, where she obtained a degree in journalism and graduated magna cum laude. During her college years, Patsy won the title of Miss West Virginia and went on to compete in the Miss America pageant. She reported winning a $2,000 scholarship during the West Virginia competition in the category of dramatic dialogue. After completing college, Patsy moved to Atlanta, Georgia in the summer of 1979, where she met her future husband, John Ramsey. They were married in November 1980. Trujillo moved on to generic questions regarding her relationship with people in her neighborhood, her knowledge about the details of her husband's business dealings, and the types of visitors who were frequented her home. She initially did not seem to be aware of any conflicts taking place in John's work environment, but later in an interview was able to name 3 people who had left Access Graphics, John's Boulder business, under difficult circumstances. 2 of the men had reportedly been making threats after their departure from the business. She expressed ignorance about the $118,000 year-end bonus that John had received and any relevance it may have had to do with the ransom demand made by the kidnappers of JonBenet. Investigators wanted to know if she was familiar with or suspected any of the service workers who had been in the home over the years. A number of names were run past her, and she was unable to say that she recognized anyone in particular. No one stood out as a potential suspect in her early parts of her interview. Turning their focus to the events surrounding Christmas Day, Patsy indicated that the kids had awakened her and John around 6 that morning. They attempted to pace themselves in the opening of presents, and when all was said and done, she made a pancake breakfast for the family. A number of neighborhood children came over later that morning and played throughout the course of the day with Burke and JonBenet. John went to the airport sometime after the lunch hour to check on his private airplane. They were scheduled to fly to their second home in Charlevoix, Michigan at 7 a.m. the following morning to have a second Christmas with John's older children, John Andrew, Melinda, and boyfriend Stuart Long, were flying from the south to meet the Ramseys for a quick holiday celebration. Another trip had been scheduled for the Ramsey family to take a cruise on Disney's Big Red Boat in celebration of Patsy's 40th birthday, which was December 29th. Patsy advised the investigators that she had continued to do some of the packing for both trips after their pancake breakfast. This included some last-minute present wrapping in the basement of the home. She reported that clothing for Disney cruise was being packed into suitcases in John Andrew's second-floor bedroom. Clothing for the Charlevoix trip was minimal and was being placed into plastic bags. The family had been invited to Fleet and Priscilla White's home invited to Fleet and Priscilla White's home that evening to join the family and their relatives for a Christmas dinner. The kids were cleaned up after the day of play, and Patsy advised that she believed they arrived at the White home sometime after 5:30 p.m. When queried about what JonBenet may have been eating during the party, she indicated that Priscilla had specially prepared a plate of cracked crab to ensure that she would have some to enjoy. The kids reportedly liked seafood. Patsy believed they stayed at the party for several hours and headed home around 8 or 9 p.m. They made 2 stops on the way, delivering Christmas gifts to the homes of the Walkers and the Steins. It was revealed that JonBenet had fallen asleep in the car when the family returned home from the dinner party, and that John Ramsey had carried her upstairs to her bedroom. Following close on, Patsy turned down her daughter's bed and exchanged the child's black party pants with long John bottoms. The sequin-starred shirt had been worn beneath the black vest, remained on her daughter as she tucked her into bed that night. Patsy stated on several occasions that JonBenet was really zonked and never awakened after returning home from the party. Patsy would confirm during the interview that JonBenet had not had anything to eat upon returning home that evening. Patsy thought that perhaps John had stayed up to play with Burke for a few minutes before going to bed. She indicated that she had returned to the task of trying to finish putting things together for the morning trip and was not certain of how Burke went to bed that evening. She denied any further contact with him after returning home from the white dinner party. After spending approximately 30 minutes on last-minute packing, Patsy indicated that she believed that she washed her face, brushed her teeth, and changed into pajamas for bed. She estimated that she turned in around 10 or 10:30 p.m. Her husband joined her not long thereafter. Patsy stated that she rose from bed around 5:30 the following morning, December 26th, just after John had gotten up to shower. She reported that they had awakened without the use of the alarm. When queried about her activities upon rising, Patsy indicated that she had put on her makeup and done her hair and put on the same clothing worn from the dinner party the previous evening. She stated that she stopped briefly in the hallway at the laundry machines located outside of John Bonet's bedroom. Outside of John Bonet's bedroom door, it appeared slightly ajar in the way she had left it the previous evening, and there were no lights emitting from the room. Patsy then proceeded downstairs, intending to make some coffee and prepare a little breakfast before the morning flight. She indicated that she did not check on her daughter until after finding the ransom note at the bottom of the spiral stairs at the rear of the kitchen. As she descended near the rear circular stairway, Patsy noticed some paper spread across one of the lower treads. She stepped over them and turned to see 3 pages spread out from left to right. There was no indication that a light had been turned on in the darkened hallway, but she said that she leaned over it and read the note. She could not recall if she had handled the ransom note, and had only read the first few lines before seeing the part about someone having had her daughter. She immediately ran back upstairs to check on John Bonet. Patsy indicated that she pushed open the door to John Bonet's bedroom and immediately saw that she was not there. The lamp next... I gotta practice French. My red accent. Oh my. She could not recall if she had handled the ransom note and had only read the first few lines before seeing the part about someone having had her daughter. She immediately ran back upstairs to check on John Bonet. Patsy indicated that she pushed the door open to John Bonet's bedroom and immediately saw that she was not there. The lamp next to her daughter's bed was not on, and she screamed for John. John rushed down the stairs from the 3rd floor bedroom, and Patsy told him about the note that John Bonet had been kidnapped. At some point, a quick check on Burke's bedroom was made by her husband before the police were called. He had come downstairs in his underwear and had moved past the note from the stair tread to the floor near the entrance of the kitchen. John was on his hands and knees reading the note. That's John. John on his hands and knees reading the note when Patsy called 911. From a nearby kitchen wall phone. That's the picture of the spiral staircase. Look at it. That's where he was. True story. We're down the street. Patsy did not believe that John had gone to the basement before the first officer arrived on scene and indicated that he had ran back upstairs after the 911 call to dress. It was indicated that Burke had remained asleep throughout the entire ordeal and that he had remained in his room until Fleet White suggested that he could hang out at his home with visiting family in South Boulder. White did eventually drive Burke to his home and where he remained until after the discovery of his sister's body. An initial suspect reported to the police that morning was the Ramsey housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh. Patsy mentioned that Hoffman Pugh had requested a $2,000 loan and that she thought that the handwriting on the ransom note looked similar to that of the housekeeper. Patsy failed to mention to investigators during the April interview anything about Hofstorm Pugh's previous comments about the kidnapping. On the morning of December 26th, as investigators were investigating the case, it came to their attention that Linda Hoffman Pugh had once asked Patsy if she had ever been concerned about JonBenet being kidnapped. Hoffman Pugh thought her to be a pretty little girl and that she might be an attractive target for someone who was so inclined. At the close of the interview, Patsy denied writing the ransom note or knowing something about a foreign faction or the meaning of SBTC, the purported signatory to the ransom note. In addition, she disavowed any knowledge about or participation in the death of her daughter. Trejo and Thomas began their interview of John at 3 that afternoon, and he confirmed some of the details about putting JonBenet to bed after returning from the white dinner party, as had been provided by his wife. He estimated that he left the Whites around 8:30, 8:45, and then delivered some presents to the home of the Walker and Steins family. They arrived home around 9 to 9:30. JonBenet had fallen asleep in the car, and John carried her to her bedroom upon their arrival home. She remained asleep throughout the process, and Patsy reportedly followed him several minutes later to prepare her for bed. That was the last time John saw his daughter alive. Burke was interested in putting together some type of toy that he had received for Christmas, and John indicated that he had spent a little time with him downstairs helping to assemble it. They spent approximately 15 minutes working on the project. Anxious to get to bed because of their early morning flight, John then had Burke prepare for bed, change his clothes, brush his teeth, and getting him settled in for the night. John did not think Burke had anything to eat after returning home that evening. John then prepared himself for bed and took a melatonin tablet to help him fall asleep quickly. He joined Patsy in their bed sometime around 10. He thought he may have read for a bit and estimated that the lights were out by 10:30 or 10:40. Neither he nor Patsy were thought to have gotten up over the remainder of the night. He rose the next morning at about 5:25 before the alarm went off and had been set for 5:30. Patsy was still in bed as he headed for the shower. Partway through his morning ritual, he heard a scream of panic from Patsy, and he could tell from her tone that something was wrong. He ran down from the back staircase and met her midway at the landing. He remembered her showing him the note, and he thought that he had ran back upstairs to check on JonBenet's room and then on Burke. Burke was still asleep and reportedly had not been awakened by Patsy's scream. John was not certain if Patsy had handled the ransom note, but recalled that it was he that moved it from the hallway floor near the entrance of the kitchen and read it as Patsy called 911. It was spread out across the floor, and he was hunched over doing so. It was so that he could read it quickly. After finishing the 911 call, John was aware that Patsy had called the Whites and the Fernies, and he ran back upstairs to finish dressing. Officer Rick French was the first to arrive on scene, and he had reported that French directed them to the first floor solarium. He couldn't remember the exact sequence, but other police officers arrived along with the family friends who had been summoned to the home. When asked about the security of the home, John indicated that the connecting door between the house and the garage was typically typically left unlocked, and that he usually checked the rear door that the kids used to access the backyard. John indicated that he believed he had checked all of the first floor doors on the morning of the 26th. He went outside at one point to check on an exterior door that had access to the garage. The interior of that door was blocked with boxes, and he couldn't get into it from inside the garage. He estimated that he was outside no longer than 30 seconds and had gone out a side door to check on the security of that door. John did not report finding any other ground floor door opened or unsecured. John walked the investigators through the discovery of his daughter's body, explaining that Detective Art had asked that the home be checked for anything unusual. John led Fleet White to the train room of the basement and explained that he had broken in through the set of windows when locked out of the house that previous summer. They inspected the area of the broken glass, and when John moved out of the room and down the hallway to the wine cellar, he reported that he unlatched the wood block that secured the door and immediately saw a white blanket on the floor inside the room. John advised that he observed JonBenet lying on the blankets, and it was a kind of folded around her legs. Her legs were tied behind her. Her arms were tied behind her head. Some pieces of black tape were on her legs, and her head was cocked to the side. John immediately removed a black piece of tape that covered her mouth and tried to untie the bindings around her wrists. He was not successful at fully removing them and grabbed his daughter beneath her arms and carried her upright to the first floor of the house. He noted that her body was stiff, and he placed her on the floor after arriving upstairs. The big surprise came for investigators when John revealed that he had been to the basement earlier in the morning. Before being directed to check the house by Detective Art at approximately 1 p.m. that day, John indicated that he had seen the broken train room window during his earlier trip. There was no glass around, and he presumed it had not been repaired from his previous forced entry that summer. He stated that the window was open approximately 1/8 of an inch, and he latched the window before returning upstairs. When pressed for a time frame of the first undeclared visit, John thought that it had probably been before 10 a.m. Investigators wondered why he would be leaving the room where a trap and trace and recorder had been established to accept the ransom call from the kidnappers. To explore the further reaches of the basement. To them, it seemed more likely that he had made this trip to the basement a little later in the morning, when Detective Art first reported losing track of his whereabouts somewhere around 10:40 a.m. John here, he offered the theory that someone had come through the basement window and had mentioned the Samsonite suitcase sitting below the window. He pointed out that someone could have gotten into the home without it, but that someone would have needed to step on it in order to climb out of the window. He noted that the window well grate would not have been obvious to someone walking by the home. Just someone walking by the home. Your home, John. Your very insanely large home. The ground level grate was not visible from the front street side of the home, nor was it readily visible from the rear alley. John had commented shortly after the discovery of JonBenet's body that whoever had committed the crime had to have someone on the inside, and cited that these initial thoughts as one of the reasons that the housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, had been the first named as a possible suspect. She and her husband were intimately familiar with the Ramsey home and the layout of the basement. The interview with John Ramsey concluded at approximately 5 p.m. on the afternoon of April 30th, 1997. Patsy's interview had taken nearly 6 hours. His lasted merely 90 minutes. 90 whole minutes. Husband and wife left the building in the escort of a cadre of attorneys. Investigators would learn some new things that had not been revealed during the hours of interviews that had been conducted with the parents on the day of JonBenét's kidnapping. A number of topics were broached over the course of the day, including the use of polygraphs. A later chapter will speak to that particular issue. Patsy seemed to handle questions with composure, but some instances appeared to be evasive, according to the personal observations of the investigators. A number of questions were answered with "I don't remember," or "I don't remember," or "I don't recall," something that could be reasonably expected given the time delay between the events and the dates of this interview. It was Thomas's opinion, however, that Patsy had been well rehearsed in advance to the interview and that a different woman sat before him than what he had experienced during the December 28th non-custodial evidence collection procedure. Some minor inconsistencies had developed during this interview, and a few other important details were pinned down by investigators. The initial reporting of JonBenet going to bed wearing a red turtleneck top had changed between the time of Patsy's first interview on the morning of December 26th and that conducted on April 30th. It is not clear from Patsy's April interview what became of the red sweater, but crime scene investigators had located the top balled up on a bathroom counter of JonBenét's bathroom during the process of the crime scene. Here's a picture. There it is. Look at it. I'll probably use it for my thumbnail. Additionally, Patsy was now indicating that she had found the note first before checking JonBenét's bedroom. This conflicted with the information that she had provided to officers on the morning of December 26, where she indicated that she had stopped by her daughter's bedroom on the way downstairs to the kitchen. The bed had been empty at the time, and it wasn't until she continued to the kitchen that she found the note. Oh, jeez, I was so angry. I'm having a bad week, guys. I'm sorry. Soften my edges. Soften my edges. Brrr. Was this an important discrepancy or merely a hysterical confusion on the part of the mother of a missing child? Investigators were also concerned about the statement that she had read the first few lines of the ransom note before charging back upstairs to check on JonBenet. During the panic of the moment, Patsy had been able to tell the 911 dispatcher that the ransom note had been signed off with the word "victory" and the initials SBTC. How would she know if she had never truly handled the ransom note or read through all 3 pages? This information suggested prior knowledge of the content of the note. John had revealed a previously unknown trip to the basement that took place before the discovery of JonBenét's body. He had never mentioned this exploration to officers on the morning of the reported kidnapping. John also provided specific details about immediately observing a white blanket and his daughter's body upon opening the cellar room door that afternoon. He reported he saw a white blanket in which JonBenet was wrapped the instant he opened the wine cellar. The observation purportedly took place before he flipped on the light switch. This didn't jive with details provided by Fleet White during his interviews with detectives. White had opened the cellar door earlier that morning and reported that it was too dark to see anything without a light being turned on in the room. He had stepped partially through the door and couldn't find the light switch, let alone see the blanket and body. Investigators pondered the question, How could John Ramsey have immediately recognized the blanket and the body under the same conditions? When all was said and done, investigators went away from the interviews with more than a few unanswered questions and continued to feel that John Benet's parents could not be eliminated as possible suspects in the crime. The Ramseys immediately held their own press conference the following May 1997 and invited a few from the Denver media stations to attend. Ramsey media publicist Pat Cortine coordinated the event in a Boulder hotel conference room. Each of the 7 local reporters had been handpicked by the Ramsey team, and many others had been covering the story from early on and were covetous of an invitation. The Ramseys had not spoken to the media since the January 1st CNN interview, and reporters were anxious to see what they had to say, especially after their interview with the Boulder police investigators. Carol McKinney, a reporter working on the Denver KOA radio at the time, received a last-minute invitation on the morning of the press conference. Apparently, Corton had forgotten to include anyone from the radio community and had called McKinley not long before the Ramseys were preparing to issue their statement. Corton provided McKinley with the secret location of the conference and gave her a password that she would need to gain entry to the room where the Ramseys would be speaking. McKinley had taken the telephone call while in the company of other reporters, and they had discussed the possible location and timing of the family press conference. Based upon her cell phone conversation, some of her peers immediately sensed that she had been granted access to the inner sanctum. She had to drive in a roundabout fashion to lose trail of reporters who were trying to follow her to the secret location of the Ramsey press conference. When she arrived at the lobby of the hotel, McKinley was approached by someone who asked her to recite her secret password. She muttered the word subtract. She said, "I must be removed. I must be subtracted from the equation, removed from underneath the umbrella of suspicion." I'm gonna watch that interview later. It's so stressful. Subtract. She muttered the word. She felt like a loser. Working in the hotel, sometimes we have like secret code words and you get just a baggie of random free crap and people get all embarrassed having to say a code word. It's my favorite though. Fucking nerds. But yeah, it's a good time. I appreciate when people lean into that into the nerdiness. Anyways, this journalist, she felt a fool. She muttered the word subtract. I wonder if she felt like a spy. She muttered the word subtract, and she was then adorned with a bright green circular sticker. "Don't let that fall off," she was warned. The sticker granted her access to the small conference room that contained the Ramseys. All of the reporters present were advised of the ground rules for the conference. It would only last 30 minutes. John and Patsy Ramsey would make a short introductory statement, and then reporters could ask their questions. They could not, however, ask any questions about the murder investigation. They were not permitted to ask any questions about or refer to other people that were in the room. They were family attorneys and friends who reportedly were accompanying the family of their endeavor. Any violation of the ground rules would result in immediate termination of the press conference. McKinley and her fellow reporters entered a dark hotel conference room to see John and Patsy Ramsey sitting by a well-lit table. A beautiful floral arrangement sat upon the table and seemed to draw the attention away from about a dozen people who stood in the shadows of the views of the cameras. There is a picture. Last time I used that picture, I got a copyright strike. That was a good time. That was a different channel again. Different life. I don't know. As the press conference began, Patsy Ramsey held up the reward poster that had been published in the Boulder Daily Camera several days earlier and asked for the help of the journalist who had been invited to attend the press conference. I'd like to say that we would. One of the reasons we asked all of you to be here this morning is that we need your help this moment on. I know you have been diligently covering this case, and we appreciate what some of you have said, not all of what you have said. We need to work together as a team, and we need your help. The reporters were a little gun-shy and stumbled through a series of innocuous questions that danced around the issue of the brutal murder of a little girl. True to their word, the press conference ended precisely at the 30-minute mark. McKinley later described the environment as one of the most bizarre media events she had ever witnessed. Ramsey attorneys and their friends hoovered behind the reporters and their cameras in the darkened corners of the room. She felt nothing of substance had been discussed and that the conference gave the appearance of being a fluff piece intended to give the family the opportunity to show their continuing efforts to cooperate with authorities. Many had the clear impression that the Ramseys were attempting to manage the media and to spin their own side of the story. Unbeknownst to the media, however, was that by the time the Ramseys gave their first official interview with the police on April 30th, 1997, the 30 or so Boulder investigators assigned to the case had already I don't know. Had already interviewed nearly 400 people. The list included those who were thought to be witnesses, who could provide background information, as well as those whom police considered to be potential suspects. By that time, investigators had also collected 63 sets of handwriting exemplars, 64 sets of fingerprints, and 45 DNA blood samples, and 50 sets of hair samples. One polygraph examination had been administered to a non-familial suspect. In spite of their assurances of wanting to continue to cooperate with authorities, John and Patsy Ramsey wouldn't participate in another law enforcement interview for another 14 months. The next time around, Boulder Police Department investigators would not be invited to the table. Where you at, John? They waiting. He says, I'm busy. I gotta go to CrimeCon. Whatever. Chapter 12, returning to the scene of the crime. It was reported that sometime after Lou Smith joined the DA's office in March of 1997, he began to hold a prayer vigil outside of 15th Street Ramsey home. It's inappropriate. That's why we have the separation of church and state, sir. It's pretty unprofessional. As a devout Christian, I presume that he also prayed for guidance in his comfort and effort in finding the killer of this little girl. At one juncture, the family reportedly came by the house as Smith was engaged in his personal vigil. They were invited to join him in the Lord's Prayer, and some investigators came to suspect that this became a fairly regular occurrence over the late spring and summer of 1997. It was mildly aggravating to some of the detectives because it appeared that Smith was becoming a little too familiar with the Ramsey parents. Smith may have been trying to become better acquainted with the family so that he might learn something new about the murder, but the Boulder cops thought that he was losing his objectivity in the case. Boulder police investigators returned to the home in July 1997 with another purpose in mind. By that time, they were trying to reconcile Fleet White's accounting of events with those stated by John Ramsey's. White had told investigators that he had not been able to see a thing when he opened the door of the wine cellar on the morning of the morning of the kidnapping. Ramsey had told them that he had spotted the white blanket on the floor immediately upon opening the door. Investigators wanted to see for themselves exactly what could be seen or not seen when the door of the wine cellar was opened under similar lighting conditions. Additionally, the neighbors' canvases had produced a witness who reported hearing a child scream on the night of the murder. Investigators wanted to verify whether or not this was feasible and whether this scream could be heard from within the confines of the home. Though the Boulder police had originally requested a search warrant to return to the premises, the DA's office secured the consent of the family and their realtor for the investigators to conduct their inquiries. As was typical of the time, a swarm of media vehicles camped outside of the residence as the police and DA investigators went about their business. The interior of this old 1920s Tudor-style home had changed fairly significantly since investigators had been through the home. Much of the furniture and personal belongings of the family had been removed. Carpet had been replaced in some areas, and the smell of fresh paint hung in the air. A for sale sign adorned the front yard where there had last stood Christmas decorations. Not long after arriving in the home, investigators noted something unusual. Small wiring ran from several motion detectors, and they seemed to lead to a locked closet. We're on page 132. I knew I was this. Okay. Not long after arriving in the home, investigators noted something unusual. Small wiring ran from several motion detectors, and they seemed to lead to a locked closet beneath the basement stairs. Though the house was old and had been subjected to extensive remodeling, the detectives thought it was odd that the wiring to these devices would not have been concealed in the ceiling or walls. Upon closer inspection, the motion detectors appeared to contain small camera lenses. Sergeant Wickman kicked in the door of the closet and observed that a VHS recorder was actively recording 4 different rooms of the interior of the home. He directed Detective Gosage to collect the tapes and later confirmed that the members of the Boulder Police Department investigative team had been recorded on the tape as they had moved around the house. Closer examination of the recorder revealed that it was not set to record upon the activation of the motion detector, but had to be manually turned on in order to enter a record mode. Neither the realtor or the Ramsey's attorneys mentioned a word about the damages sustained to the locked closet door or the removal of the VHS tape from the recorder. Their team of private investigators later took responsibility for the placement of the recorders, citing burglary. Ugh. I don't know how to pronounce certain words. Ugh. Just made a very scary word sound. My life is a musical, I'm sorry. Citing burglary concerns for the empty home. I don't believe that. I think they had a kid with behavioral issues, and so they put cameras in their house to make sure he didn't do weird shit with his little sister. Ugh. Page 133. There is, Mr. Steve Thomas, there is a lecture where he puts pictures of the video camera recording room on screen. I'm gonna go find it. Neither the realtor nor the Ramseys attorney mentioned a word about the damages sustained to the locked closet door or the removal of the VHS tape from the recorder. Their team of private investigators later took responsibility for the placement of the recorders, citing burglary concerns for the empty home. No one ever admitted to activating the recorder before the investigators had arrived on the scene that day. Yeah, we have no proof that's when that was built and implemented. Investigators spent nearly a week moving through the 3 floors of the 7,000 square foot home. Police and DA investigators debated back and forth the likely scenarios that may have played out on the night of the kidnap and murder. They took turns wiggling through the basement bathroom and the train room windows to determine the type of effort it would have taken to enter the home through those locations. Dupree is my Dupree. It's a Freudian slip. Sorry about that. Happy New Year, Dupree. Debris from outside the bathroom window was dragged along with the faux intruder to the inside of the home and was not consistent with the crime scene photos that showed an interior shelf below the window to be in pristine condition. The photos had also shown the bathroom window to be securely locked, and there were no signs of forced entry at this location. This particular window was eventually discontinued as possible, as it was eventually discounted as a possible point of entry. And it was perhaps the only thing that the Boulder Police Department and DA investigators would agree upon after leaving the home that week. More time was spent debating the possibility that an intruder had made entry through the window well of the train room. Lou Smith held to the belief that this was the perfect location for an intruder to have entered the home. The 3 strands and spider webs anchoring the window gate to the foundation walls of the well seemed to play no significance in his theory of events, and he pointed to the foliage between the metal grate and foundation as evidence that the grate had been lifted sometime recently. Steve Thomas pointed out that the grate did not sit flush to the cement foundation and that it was a natural occurrence for the foliage to grow into that space. They continued to argue about the other signs and lack of signs of possible entry observed in the dirt silt and covered the exterior windowsill and frame. A black scuff mark located on the wall beneath the train room window also generated some discussion, and Smith thought for certain that it belonged to an intruder that had climbed into the home of the location. The theoretical debate regarding possibilities and probabilities went on all week long. Detectives sometimes stayed into the wee hours of the night, listening to the creaks and the groans of the old home. It seemed that one could not move about the house without being heard from one area of the home. Nearly every step taken seemed to cause some type of audible response from the floor, joists, and of the structure. Moreover, investigators found it difficult to move around in the darkness and observed that a descent of the spiral staircase by use of the ambient light was a dangerous proposition. How had a perpetrator managed to do this while carrying a 40-pound child in his arms? Detective Gosage had moved around to different parts of the home to see if shouting could be heard from the 3rd floor master suite of the parents. Investigators were trying to determine if the family had been able to hear the same scream the neighbor Melody Staton had claimed to hear. Boulder investigators reported hearing Gosage's shouts from various locations of the home, including the basement. A A partially open street-facing basement window was thought to have been responsible for Stanton's ability to hear a scream emanating from the basement. An electrical cord had run through this window over the Christmas holidays to provide power to the decorations displayed on the front lawn of the residence. The window was of insufficient size to have permitted anyone to have entered or exited the home from this location. An expert was used to help construct the lighting conditions that would have been present when Fleet White and John Ramsey reported opening the door of the wine cellar. A white blanket was placed on the floor where John Bonet's body had been found, and sensitive photographic light meters were used to attempt to duplicate the conditions of December 26th. John Ramsey had stated that he observed the white blanket immediately upon opening the door. Investigators noted that the room was pitch black and that they had recreated the same drill, and the blanket was unobservable to them. Gosage noted in his reports that even with the interior lights on, he couldn't see the blankets until he stepped into the room and had sufficiently cleared a short wall located to the left of the door. After spending nearly a week exploring the scene of the crime, Boulder police and DA investigators parted company. The many theories that had been discussed and debated during their time together in the home had only served to solidify their earlier positions on the matter. They didn't establish shit. I know. Okay. Poor Johnny B, man. Dog, I'm so tired of this case sometimes. Law enforcement investigators would not be the only people interested in visiting the scene of the crime. During the 1-year anniversary of John Bonet's murder, a number of people would gather outside of her home and offer a prayer, light a candle, or place a stuffed animal on the lawn of the residence in memory of the little girl that had once lived there. The presence of one particular participant would catch the eye of Schmidt. However, the convicted sex offender Gary Olivia would soon be the object of his inquiry. Schmidt would eventually discover that Olivia had written a poem about John Bonet. The fact that he owned a stun gun turned him into even more of a viable suspect as Schmidt continued his search to identify the intruder responsible for this crime. Olivia, like many other registered sex offenders living in Boulder County, would be carefully scrutinized for possible involvement by police investigators working the case. He would neither be the first nor the last of the pedophiles who were either intrigued by or fantasized about the death of this little 6-year-old girl. Happy New Year's Eve. I am going to a sobriety powwow. I don't know if you guys have ever been to a powwow. I'm going to go get a buffalo burger. I'm so excited. Okay.